Today, I have a special guest with us, so I'm going to bring him up right away, and we're going to get started. Welcome to the show, Zetetic Warrior. How's it going?
How's it going, Notch?
Talking about the truth, talking about what's actually happening in this reality is a battlefield, and thus we have found ourselves to be rubbing shoulders and finding ourselves on the same line of things against actually. We're outnumbered. I feel like we're kind of like Sparta, we're like the 300 who's like right at that narrow passageway, holding off the Persians type of deal. So that's how I feel about it.
Right. Whatever that story is about Sparta and whether it was
Right.
even a real thing, who knows? But the idea
Hmm.
is, even to this day, the fact that we remember the Spartans and their story, do we know any other warriors associated with that war? Anybody in the Persian side besides what is his name, King Xerxes? And no,
Xerxes, yeah,
they're
yeah.
they're lost through the sands of time. But we remember the Spartans because when you see people who are standing up for something that they believe in or something that they think is valuable, and when you see people who are willing to sacrifice things and put things on the line on whatever level that might be, it appeals to something within men and women. There's only certain people that can do it, and that doesn't mean you and I or anything special. But people have their moments. They have their moments in time. And what I found, in as far as the camaraderie with you, is that with this time we've had through the FE community over the last 9 months or a year, you were one of the ones who stood up and basically spoke the truth as you see it. You see, free of agenda. And we were able to see what happens again when all these people are associated with these other motives, whatever they may be, biases, presuppositions, assumptions, whatever. It doesn't even have to be financial. If somebody is a strict, let's say, follower of a Hebrew cosmology, well, they're going to have a belief system and they're going to have some type of adherence to a cosmological understanding that they may not even be aware of, that influences the way they think, the way they speak, and the way they present themselves. What I got from you as a person who is endeavoring for truth on truth's terms, whatever it may bring, sometimes truths are ugly. It's not, sometimes we discover things that we really didn't want to know, or we wouldn't have wanted to know, or that are in some way potentially negative. For instance, let's talk about the upward vector. I don't think either of you, you or I, came into this thing thinking that we would discover and begin to unravel this phenomenon of the upward vector as it relates to this, natural phenomenon of gravis or gravitas. When you follow evidence and when you look at things as they are, and you look at this world as it is, and you try to move past your senses, move past your belief system, you may find that you discover things that you could have never even imagined. Again, back to the globe conversation, where I am with people and they ask me about, well, why do I think a certain way about the cosmology? Why do I reject heliocentrism? And I just say, because reality demonstrates certain things to us. And what reality is showing me is that this idea that they're presenting of a globe and, orbiting the sun
Hmm.
is physically impossible. And that's
Right.
it. That's it. There's really nothing you could show me or explain to me about some optical observation, no matter what it is, that's going to overrule and trump this understanding I have about the physical world. Again, but does one have the courage, the confidence, and the ability to really empty their cup and examine the physical world as it is, free of indoctrination, free of the propagandized mind that all of us have if we grow up in this Western culture? So, again, where the truth brings you, I think, is an individual journey. But if we're to at least say that there's some objective truth that exists, a person endeavoring truth will likely end up at a very similar place as another one doing the same thing. Again, regardless of the culture, regardless of the background, regardless of many things, if truth exists in the absolute, whether or not we could ever touch it in this material world, it should bring us down a similar path. I'm realizing now this is such an individual thing, and it's probably for the better.
Hmm.
It's really a journey of self-discovery rather of discovery of some like alternate counterculture that we can then plug into. It just seems like this, never-ending Russian nesting dolls type of situation that when you get off one reservation, you find yourself on another one and so on. So instead of looking out, I've discovered that this is an inward journey, and there's really no end to that journey because, self-discovery is probably the only discovery journey that really is worth taking.
I mean, like, who the fuck want to know that their Earth is rising? Whether constantly or through acceleration. I mean, like, that idea seems just absolutely crazy. But so is flat Earth. So is flat Earth. When we first initially got involved with it, it's like insane to think that we're not living on a globe. How is it possible? Like all my life, I'm thinking about space and space stations and planets and shit, going around and, Big Bang and, other solar systems. And we have everything all mapped out. We know what this reality is about. And then come to this truth that the Earth is not a globe and we're not spinning around. And then some people out there who think the Earth is flat, what the fuck is wrong with them? That's fucking insane, you know?
Well, I look at it as like a paradigm. And how are these paradigms that we have shaped? You can't really understand these so-called truths unless one understands the nature of deception and really the nature of this reality and how deceptive it is, right down to its fundamental metaphysics. And that's really the whole of the thing, because once you can understand how deception works, then you could begin to see past the lies. You don't have to really know what a thing is to know what it's not. For instance, I know that the Earth can't be what they say it is, but I'm under no obligation to then tell you then what that is.
Right.
You see, that would be very egoic and arrogant to even think that one can do that. There's a bunch of claims being made about this reality from whoever they are, whether it's academia, whether it's the religious institutions, the government, on and on. There's claims left and right. Claims need to be supported. They have to be proven, substantiated through empirical evidence. Short of that standard, it does not exist in reality. It's just a concept. It's just a thought, either a good or a bad idea. Nothing more, nothing less. What we find when we look at this world is the claims that we're being and have been presented with as humanity and as a society really don't hold up to this scrutiny. It doesn't pass the smell test, and it's really unsupported by evidence. It's unsubstantiated and not proven, whether it's the macro world or the micro world. You see, the world seems to be in some way fractal. Whether you look to the macro or to the micro, we find a fractal world. It's infinitely complex in both directions. And it really starts to give us an understanding about, again, the fundamental metaphysics of this reality. And it gives us at least a framework to place ourselves within this reality. So there's a bunch of people that are going to tell you a bunch of things that they have it all figured out. And they're going to adhere to these things, and they're going to present it as if it's proven and as if it's settled. But as you explore it, and when you really start to look at their proofs, you find that everything is based on a fundamental belief system, meaning to say things are positive. The term would be axiomatic, as an axiom. You must accept something on faith in the fundamental before you could then build logically to whatever conclusion they're going to present. So when we're presented with evolution and Big Bang and macroevolution, and again, the vastness of space, the subatomic world, we find that it's really not substantiated. So what is this world really? Again, I don't have to tell you what this world is to tell you what it's not. And what it seems to be more is the world that is understood and has been understood by the so-called mystery schools, the elites, the knowledge that has been carried through times, that we live in a world that is more conscious, spiritual, ethereal, astral. There seems to be a spectrum of reality that we exist in, where we're perceiving a material world, but very likely we're existing simultaneously within this larger spectrum. And this is the world they're hiding from us. They're going to say there's no proof of the supernatural, and as if they hand wave the elephant in the room. But this is exactly what I think is the most important thing is understanding that this is much more than a physical world, a conscious and a spiritual world. When you look at reality on those terms, things tend to make a little bit more sense. Because if you're playing in their arena by their rules and playing their ball game, you're going to be governed by the tenets that they set.
Mhm.
And there's really no way to win if you're playing their game.
Yeah, but we have thousands of scientists and hundreds of years of research and all these institutions, and how can they all be lying to you? I mean, that's the way like people think, and so that's they say lie often, right, and lie big, and that's what a lot of the deep truth of our reality is about. Is that they're big lies, and they just constantly repeat over and over again. It's like a kind of a programming, and so if they do that often enough and big enough, we just accept the fact that, oh yes, we're spinning, and it must be a globe, and all these guys in lab coats with their clipboards and pens in their pocket with their thick glasses, they're telling you, and they're smart. They're pretty smart people out there, and they're telling you what it is. So how can they all be wrong? They all agree that this is a thing, but that's the thing. They're the one who are making claims, and we are dismantling that. And truth overcomes. Truth overcomes all these, groups of people and big institutions, because it's a simple truth. It's a simple truth about, like, hey, how does this reality work? How does an accelerometer work? Like, does water work? Like all these like things that anybody, you don't need to spend millions of dollars on force the line or anything. All you need is to have a fundamental understanding of how water works. That's it. What does water do? And that dismantles all those institutions, all the governments, and all the ISS and everything, you know. And that's the power in the truth, is that anybody can, get a hold of it, and they can actually start to see reality. But that's the thing. That's the difficulty a lot of people have, because they cannot let go. It's difficult for them to let go because they've been programmed, and now they're invested, and they don't want to look like a fool. They don't want to look like they're the ignorant one, and they don't want to look like they're the crazy one, but they are living in a crazy world. That's the reality of the matter. And so the craziness and the crazy world is like kind of like watered down to the point where it's like, okay, now it's normal. I can feel like I fit in, and I can kind of, participate, in a way, because I don't want to be called a flat earther. I don't want to be called a tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorist. And sometimes, and this is just my opinion, that some of them actually they do a disservice to the movement, because then they like go out and do the crazy thing and say the crazy stuff, and talk about the projected simulated sun or whatever it might be, and they are also making claims, and that also makes that whole movement kind of looking actually crazy though too. So this is part of my experience as well, you know.
And it begs the question, if we have these people making certain ideas look crazy, you start to wonder, what's their motive really? Again, with the FE topic, what we see is the basic false binary. It's, again, like you said, it's a claim. So certain people in this community, they're going to tell you that the world's not a certain thing, but then they're going to make a claim on what the world is. No more or less evidenced than the original claim regarding the cosmology. Easily falsified, easily debunked. What's their motive? Why make false claims? Why make claims that, when are proven false, continuing making those claims? It almost seems like the perfect controlled opposition will present them with a new version of the world, a version that could be easily falsified, lead a bunch of people down a particular path, and then cut the legs right out from under it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even more so, have a person or a bunch of people promote a certain model of the world and the cosmology for 10 years, and have those very people then falsify the model that they pretty much propped up and benefited from for those times. So again,
Yep.
it's the dialectic, and it's a classic either or fallacy. And getting back to
Yep.
what you were saying previously, it's really just about logic. People talk about science so much, as if science has all the answers. And no, well,
Mm-hmm.
not the co-opted science, but real science, okay? As if you need a lab in a controlled environment. And I think that's another rabbit hole that I think is maybe not the most beneficial, because in reality, you just need the sovereignty of mind to know what logic is and reason and critical thinking. You just have to be able to look at this world past the indoctrination. And like you said, the things are basic. What does the world show? Water lies level when it's standing. Just looking at a raindrop shows you the upward vector. If you have a candle and you drop it and observe it, just this simple thing debunks their claim of gravity. You don't need science. You don't need a lab. You don't need education. You don't need to understand anything except that you need to move past what you were taught, because what you were taught was likely taught to you for some agenda, probably to control you. But it's a classic either or fallacy. We've been calling a false dilemma, false binary, whatever you want to call it. It's the Coke or Pepsi. This is a world that's infinite. Again, if we're to recognize that it's a fractally large and fractally small world on either ends, we have to understand that it's infinite. The doors of perception were cleansed. Men would see things as they truly are, infinite. It's only through our limited senses, which seem to be filters in this world, that we conjecture a limited world, a finite world. And again, back to the mystery schools, back to the secret understandings held by these occult brotherhoods, they seem to have known this. This seems to be the most prized bit of knowledge that we have from humanity, is that it is a conscious and spiritual reality that we live in, and we can be intimately in touch with that. And I think we were more in touch with it in previous times. I think we've been conditioned and trained out of that. I think once you forget that we're magical, once our imaginations have been dimmed down, once we're presented with all this media and we're taught how to think, I think we lose something that we have naturally. You see it in children. There's a spark that I think we lose at some point. If you can just observe the world around you, you can experience the world around you like a child, whatever the message was from this Christ figure, whoever he may be. One of the fundamental tenets was to look at this world as a child. And even says, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven unless you do so as a little child. And I think that's something that's overlooked, because we think we need to acquire things in this world. If I get this thing, if I gain this knowledge, if I learn this thing, if I read this book, if I meet this person, we're reaching for something. But I think there's really something in the letting go. It's almost counterintuitive. The more you can let go, the more you can come within yourself and find a peaceful place within you. I think then you can then tap into some type of universal resonance where things become much more clear.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. And what's interesting and fascinating to me is that people put in their time and energy and attention to these things. Like maybe we were taught that, oh yes, maybe there's truth in it, or maybe there's some kind of a programming where my parents, my grandparents, and my ancestors were a part of that religion or that line of thinking. But that's something that's been developed and given to people for one reason or another, and then we become complacent. Like you said, this reality is mysterious, and we're constantly evolving, constantly learning, and there's like, for lack of a better word, there's a magical process that is, like, it's supernatural. There's stuff that's actually happening, and when we think along those lines, like what, why, how, all these kind of questions, what's happening, who's it happening to, and all this type of stuff, we kind of veer off the path, the tributaries that are presented to us. We go in a different direction, and it is a kind of an individual journey, but that direction of going on our own path, you also find other people like yourself, like myself, and other people here in the chat who are also kind of like moving in that direction as well. Whatever that destination might be, I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know what that destination is. It's important for me to go and discover the truths of this reality on my own. I think a part of me, when I don't know about you, but part of me, I just wanted to see what kind of content I would create. And I didn't know at that time that, like, I would want to be talking about these type of things. And I could see myself changing and evolving and becoming my own individual, because we all have our own individuality. God gave you your place, your time to be who you are. You need to just find that resonance, and be yourself 100%, and not anybody else, though, too. In the Gita, it is said that it's better to be imperfect self. It's better to be your imperfect self than a perfect somebody else.
Look, with any creative process, the goal would be to be as authentic as one could be. If you're a painter and you step in front of that canvas, you want to authentically create. And that's the thing about art, whatever the medium, that I think moves people, is when they can tap into an authentic thing versus something that's prepackaged for whatever reason. People resonate with authenticity, and I think they always will, even more so in this world of like AI, this whole biodigital world that we live in, this transhumanist world that they're bringing us into. I still think there's going to be a place, and even more so, for authenticity on whatever it is, because we can't beat AI. We're not going to know more than the AI. Okay, we're not going to have an encyclopedic knowledge that some kind of algorithm is going to have. ChatGPT can literally search the entire internet, everything that's ever been produced, to give you some answer. We can't ever do that. But what do we have that it doesn't have? We have authenticity. We have a spirit. We have something that it doesn't have, really. So I always think that that's going to be valued no matter what, as long as there's men and women on earth. I think there's going to be something inside us that really seeks out authentic, natural things. I don't ever think we could ever be co-opted enough where that'll die. And the pendulum may swing back and forth, but I think it'll always swing back and arc towards this idea of humanity. That humanity will prevail some way, somehow. Whatever this place is, there's a common understanding of that there's some type of overlying structure that either governs this world or has literally co-opted this reality in some way. Call on the fallen ones, whatever idea you want to have of whatever is at the top of this pyramid. And I choose to believe that there's something within humanity, there's something within us that will prevail over whatever timeline, even in ways we couldn't even imagine, even against such odds. This AI seems to be almost infinitely powerful. How within my mind that we can ever overcome the tyrannical, technocratic control that they're placing over us, I can't even imagine. But I have to believe there's something within the human spirit that will overcome it, whatever it is. Why not be radically authentic in this world? Why not just let go of whatever they're trying to get us to hold on to, this world that they've created for us, this rigged game? Why not let it go? Why not find the humanity within yourself? Maybe that's the best chance we have, because if we play by its rules, there's no way we could win. That's really the only way to win, is not play their game. So I think the more people choose to do that, the better off we'll be, in whatever form that takes. Because, of course, we have these material bodies. We have to exist in some way. Deals have to be made in this world, but that doesn't mean we have to sell our souls to it. To commit yourself over to the world or to completely reject it, I think, is an either or fallacy. There's some point where we have to be in this world and, not of it, and maintain our humanity. It really comes down to basics and fundamentals, and it may just come down to an understanding of God's spirit or whatever it is. Everything else seems to be just details.
And it's the triumph of the human spirit, as far as I'm concerned. The spirit wants freedom. The spirit wants truth. The spirit wants to know what this reality is about. The spirit wants to know God. For me, I know God exists, as an example. Like, I have my own subjective understanding or perspective that God exists for me. But what God is of this reality, and how God is, like, working through me and others, and how he is, he better than it, as a lack of a better pronoun, but is like, permeating through all things. That's difficult for me to try to even express, so that's kind of where I'm at.
To me, God is a concept. Without this concept, there really is nothing in the absolute, nothing in the ideal. This comes down to the fundamental precept and the basics of all philosophy, is this idea between, the absolute and the material, the ideal and the physical, this idea. And it really comes down to a concept of God, because without this concept, there really are no morals, values, ethics, and principles. There has to be a God concept. There's no morality without God, plain and simple, because morality just becomes defined by convention. it becomes defined by power and the whims of the day. So the concept of God is really the fundamental crux of all philosophy. I think God is evidenced. When you really look at it, I think God is substantiated just within the reality that we exist in. I think we have to be trained out of a concept of God. So if they can get, at least subconsciously, the entire world to believe that they evolved over billions of years and that we're basically space dust that coalesced by accident into the complex organisms that we are, if they can get you to believe that, then they can engineer the concept of God out of you. But God needs to be lived, experienced. It's only through the engineering, it's only through the conditioning that they can get us to adopt a belief set that is anti-God, anti-spirit, anti-consciousness. But we experience it every day, whatever it is. You can look at it through synchronicities, dreams, things that happen in our life that are beyond mere coincidence, that a logical mind can understand are beyond mere coincidence. The time you met the person at the right time that led to the thing that happened that you know that is no way possible that happened by happenstance. There's windows into the supernatural, into the conscious. If one begins to explore themselves in their own consciousness, it's through within that we can get an idea of the without. By understanding our own consciousness, we then begin to understand the greater consciousness that is this reality. And again, it goes back to the fractal world. Our energetic bodies are an exact representation of the macro world. This was understood. Again, this was suppressed, but these are the understandings of the ages. The idea that we exist energetically within these multiple states of energy, from lower to higher. It's the same reality. It's as is represented in the macro reality. Through discovery of self, we discover the world around us. So God is evidenced on its face, and I think we have an intrinsic understanding of this God concept. We have to learn that there's no God because our experience evidences it every day, just by existing in this reality. And it's actually a very, I think, infantile mindset to look at just the simply material world. Like that to me is the one that strains the most credibility, is to say we live in a purely materialistic world, that there is no God, no consciousness, no spirit, that's just particles. Because you can say, what are these particles? See, a logical mind will start to question, why? What's deeper? Oh, you say this, there's the atom. Well, what makes up the atom? Well, you have, protons, neutrons, and electrons. What makes those up? Well, you have quarks and all these other subatomic particles. Well, what makes those up? You see, you can just, you can logically follow that down and realize that whatever this reality is, it can't simply be matter as such. God is logical, you see, and anybody who's going to say otherwise really is, either deluding themselves or trying to delude you. If one endeavors in truth, they'll probably start to come to these similar understandings, because I think a lot of these truths are universal. And I think through our very nature, we have the ability to know these things. The greatest knowledge may be simply the knowledge of self, and then the ability through that to intuit all the other understandings that this reality has to offer.
Do you think it's possible that these people who are like manipulating and deceiving us in a way, like in a greater God's plan, maybe they themselves are not aware of it, but maybe in a greater God's plan, that that's a hurdle for individuals to go through in order to get to the greater truth of things?
There's really no growth without some type of resistance. It's through the trial that we're refined. There's a tried and true alchemical process. Through what they call the vitriol, we become refined. And it's always a journey inward. And through this, we become something greater. The alchemical elixir, whatever you want to look at, they talked about turning base metals into gold. Gold can be looked at as some kind of prime, pure state of matter that doesn't degrade. We can look at our spirits the same way, right? So It's only through the trial that we become refined and sharpened. So there seems to be the need for some adversarial entity, whatever you want to look at it as, regarding our journey through, whatever growth process we're going through. You have to have an adversary. There's a reason you have God and Satan. They could be two sides of the same coin, really, if you want to look at it. And the lines become blurred. Whatever these adversaries are, identified by some of us, yeah, they seem to serve some purpose. Whatever this physical reality is, and again, if you want to follow the alchemists and the hermetists, all dimensions of reality up until the singularity require basically a dichotomy. You have to have the black and the white, the positive and the negative, the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine. And you have to have this pendulum swing between those two. One is defined by the other and exists only because of the other. This is the world. It's a binary world. You have to have equal yet opposite charges to create the energy. So you need God and you need Satan in this world. That you can't have a world without those concepts. The world wouldn't exist without that. And that's, people want to search for a utopia in this world. I don't think it exists here. I don't think there's any treasure that could be built here that anybody could expect to last beyond the sands of time, because you need the duality in this physical world. So any treasure of value should be placed in a world that is unchanging, a world that exists beyond decay. And again, as the scriptures say, where your treasure is, your heart will be there also. So if your treasure's here, your heart's going to be here in this material. But if you build your treasure in a more etheric realm, in a world that can't be touched by matter, well, then that's where you will be. The fundamentals of this reality, I believe, were known through the mystics throughout time. I don't think they have to be defined by any religion. The religions seem to be some type of control matrix instituted upon us for whatever purpose. Whatever makes us, whatever our energetic body is, that seems to be something that is preserved. It appears that we're much more than we're being taught. We're much more than they want us to think we are. And we may have a level of power that would even surprise us were we to really tap into it. And like you said about other people and finding other people, there's a resonance that happens and there's a synergy that happens when I think people are around each other. And it becomes a real true situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's true synergy. Meaning to say, I could be so much more in relation to those around me. That's how resonance works. The process of resonance is completely fascinating because you can show how energy can be increased without any further energy inputs to a point that's almost infinite. So if you have a certain individual and they're, let's say, embodying a certain vibration, certain vibratory characteristics, and they're then placed around others, whether it's physically or energetically, mentally, or otherwise, emotionally, you start to see that energy grows. I think that's how movements grow. And I think that's the real threat to the system, because if you can get a bunch of people with a particular understanding around each other, you can probably see an energy output that's almost infinite, right? So what do? They divide us in so many ways, create camps, create division, build egos. They create identities within us that they define for us. Division is the name of the game. Divide and conquer, number one tactic. The last thing they want is people of like mind to get together and really challenge the system. They'll throw all kinds of hurdles in front of us to prevent us from doing so. And that's the number one thing. And so we just fight each other. Look at the wars that seemingly have been engineered throughout the years. Whatever war you look at, if you investigate enough, you find that it was really controlled by both sides from the top, engineered for a purpose. They walk away. Look what happened in 2020. Look what happened in most people's lives and how they exited that situation. What happened to the people on top? They increased their wealth. They consolidated their power. The richest people got way richer from that endeavor. And the average person basically was left in a worse condition. So the pyramid really is a good representation, I think, of how this whole system works. It seems to be some type of unitary, singular control structure that sits at the capstone. And we seem to be kind of managed at this point. So, one thing would be to understand this situation. That would probably be the first step to breaking out of it, if that's even possible. And then, two, once you understand what the situation is, then again, finding yourself within that and understanding that you're probably much more powerful than they want you to know. And then how do you access that power? How do you embrace it? And these are the fundamental questions throughout time. And you just study philosophy, study the ancients, the religions, these different mystical schools, and they all come down to these fundamental understandings of self. Understanding of self equals understanding of others.
Yeah, 100%. And like for me anyway, in my journey, I'm trying to strike a balance between the spiritual and the physical. And it's not like I have or anybody else have any expectation that we're going to learn, all the mysteries of the world. One lifetime, 100 lifetimes, million lifetimes is not going to be enough for us to learn. But we're given the time and we're given the form. So for me, I want to take advantage of it, not knowing what the future is going to be. But that doesn't mean I have to just be sitting here and be idle and say, oh, well, I don't know what the future is going to be, so I'm not going to do jack shit anyways. I think that's a mistake as well. I have a target. I move towards that target. Whatever happens, that's up to God and up to reality. But I have a goal in mind that I push through. Two, I try not to forget that we're living in a spiritual world, and whatever that is happening, what in that moment, I try to accept in a kind of a lesson way. What's the lesson here? Why am I experiencing this? Why am I having to go through this at this moment? There must be a greater purpose to all of it. For me to have a better understanding of myself, a better understanding of others, and better understanding of the collective.
To me, everything really comes down to balance. If you're going to live in this world, you have to be balanced in some way. Yes, there's worldly concerns. Yes, there's spiritual concerns. Where's the balance? Again, what does it benefit a man to gain the world but lose his soul in the process? There's a balance somewhere. So how do you maintain that? There's a homeostasis in everything. Anything that exists and anything that's alive must exist within the balance of nature. We cannot escape this. There's no difference in the human experience. We have to exist within a balance. Where the line is, it's probably different for everybody. And there's seasons and there's ebbs and flows. But in the end, you have to find that central point, the narrow gate, so to speak, the middle way, whatever that is. And again, no one could define that for you. Each person has to define that for themselves. Only you know when you sell your soul. That's an individual thing. And when you do it.